Signe Myers Hovem, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Alisha, for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. So you have a book out, The Space in Between, an Empath's Field Guide, and it's beautiful.
Thank you.
And can you tell folks a little bit about who you are and what keeps you busy in this world?
Yes, a lot keeps me busy. So I'm Signe Myers Hovem. I'm originally from Colorado. I met my Norwegian husband at the University of Colorado, Boulder. And that's where I am right now, sitting in our lovely home that we've just sold. So I'm very busy transitioning to being more based in Europe. We live in Oslo, and I have 4 grown children. So I'm kept busy just kind of keeping, track of what they're doing, where they are in the world. And I also have a spiritual counseling practice. And when I'm right now, I'm on my book launch and I'm doing book events. I hope to get back to doing workshops, which I had been doing. And, I'm kind of waiting to see what happens in the year 2022. And, hopefully can do more touring and, share my message.
Yeah. So can you tell everyone a little bit about where the idea for this book came from?
Yes, I was working in Houston, Texas. Our family has lived in many different places, many different countries. And we did spend some years in Houston. And I had a spiritual counseling practice at a large therapy center there. And I was on my lunch break and I went to, a grocery store to pick up lunch. And at the cashier, there was Oprah magazine. And it really caught my eye because it had on the front cover a subtitle of one of the articles, Beware of the Sponge People. And, empathic people are, have been kind of given the mascot of a sponge. And I was really intrigued. One, I was really happy to see something of this subject matter being on a front cover of a major mainstream outlet. And so I picked it up and I took it home to read. And in reading it, this is back in like 2007. You have to understand that, Harry Potter was still pretty prevalent. Maybe it was, I can't remember at what point it came out, but they used a lot of headlines like the dark arts and a lot of what I would say fear-based language about really needing to protect yourself. And what I had discovered at that time in the spiritual world and advice columns, a lot of it was about protection. You need to protect yourself, as if the external world was a really scary place. And this, for a bit was a bit disconcerting for me because my understanding of empathic sensitivities and receptivity wouldn't put you at a disadvantage, or it wouldn't be in detriment to yourself. And so it really signaled to me that a lot of people may have known they were sensitive, but they didn't understand the mechanics. And I'm very much a person, if I understand the function and a purpose of something, it's much more easier to operate. And we are very much operating our life, body, mind, spirit. And we came in without a manual, apart from what society or culture wanted to tell you who you were. And so for me, it became more and more apparent that if I were to demystify this, I could take it, out of the protection mode and into one of mastery, getting away from management and going towards mastering, integrating intuition, allowing your intuition to be there just as much as your instincts. And so I started to do courses on evolving your sensitive nature from sponge to empath is what it was called, and what my coursework looks like. So from there, it went into we moved then in 2009, just as I was kind of getting the workshop narrowed down. We moved to Western Asia and Azerbaijan. And at that point, I was really given the opportunity to say, can I turn this into a book? And it took me 10 years to write that book, because I started more or less in 2009, so a little bit more than that. But it actually took me that long because to language something abstract, such as intuitive receptivity, your consciousness within the energetic realm, I wanted to do it justice. And I also wanted to be as inclusive as I could be with the reader. So even if it was a reader who maybe it doesn't consider themselves empathic, they could nonetheless read it and understand somebody who was, or who was sensitive. And it would open their broaden their view of the energetic realm and become curious themselves.
Thank you for sharing all of that. And one of the distinctions that you make early on is empathic and empath. Can you tell us what the difference is between those two things?
Right. Okay. Well, I'll even bring in some other terms. I like to, I say empathic is to empath as empathetic is to empathy. And even if I just take the empathic to empath arc, this is pretty much what a person who is empathic, you are born with sensitivities. It means it's part of your sensory nature. It's part of your sensory network. And we build our perception based off of our sensory perception, right? And so you can be empathic, meaning you are receiving through your senses information, but that's a very passive state, like our eyes, our ears, our nose, all the five senses that we have related to this physical world. We receive it from the environment. And I have my screen just kind of did something funny, so I just want to bring it. I don't know why it did that, but anyway, I hopefully will. You can see me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I don't know, my screen just kind of went short on me. But anyway, so it's a very passive thing to have senses. It's when we go active, meaning if I were at a barbecue, or if I was in a street and I smelled a barbecue, I have received this passively. It's just part of the environment. And because I have experience with the smell of a barbecue, I process it and I know, oh, this is a barbecue smell. And if I wanted to say, who's cooking, I wonder, or what are they cooking, that becomes a more engaged, active state. And so when you're empathic and you receive and you understand that you've picked up something from the environment, whether it's an emotion or a thought or a physical discomfort, you've just passively received it. But if you were to go into wanting to investigate this, you've gone into a more active phase, and that is the realm of an empath. If you were just tell me that you are an empath, I would hope that means that you understand that you pick up intuitively information from the environment, and you know how to engage it in an ethical and spiritually mature way without detriment to yourself. And that to me is like, a really important part of my book is this arc from being simply empathic to, where we're typically at that point, you're overwhelmed because you don't understand your nature. You just, you feel like you're not even comfortable in your own skin. Public spaces can be overwhelming. And so as you master and you gain more understanding of who you are and your empathic nature, and you move towards being an empath, environments become less stressful. Knowing yourself creates space. I start my book with a quote from the Greek poet Pindar: know who you are and be such. And that is really the invitation of my book, which I offer a guide to be a guide. I don't want to displace anyone's authority, but each chapter gives questions for reflection in a journal. And I really am inviting everyone who reads the book to ask this question, know who you are and be such. And an empathic nature to me is one of the most authentic parts of a person, because your senses require that you know yourself beyond culture, authorities, or society. So your empathic nature is going to make you question conformity and where you conformed. I say that if you identify as an empath, you are on a spiritual path because your senses will require this from you.
Early on in the book, I think it's even the first in the introduction, you tell a story about being in the customs and immigration line, I believe, at an airport, and you touch the hand, you bump the hand of the person who's handing you, I think, your passport back, and you have this experience of knowing that he has malaria. And I'm curious, if you make a distinction between more psychic abilities and empathic abilities, and are they different in your experience?
I tend to say psychic experiences, they're impressions. They're coming again from the energetic realm. Intuition is simply your ability to read the energy present in a situation. So, you're driving home, there's many lanes of traffic, and you intuitively know to go to one lane rather than the other because you sense it will go faster. So that's an intuitive, your ability to read the energy, and it informs you like guidance. A psychic impression is just information, but it may not be there to guide you. It could just be that you pick something up from somebody else. But I would like to say, if somebody identifies themselves as a psychic or they do psychic readings, it means that they're intentionally going to read your energy at different levels in your field to acquire information, and then they will share it to you for guidance. So for me, when people are using more of the term psychic, it's really kind of an external, somebody else is reading something that would not necessarily be guidance for themselves, but it would be guidance for someone they're reading. Whereas in intuition, your own intuition is giving you that guidance.
I really appreciate you making that distinction and sharing that with us. I'm curious, in this book, what do you think, well, maybe more so when you were teaching the class, what were some of the biggest ahas that people experienced as they were going from sponge to more of that boundaried, strong empath?
Well, I think here I want to introduce something that we all do, whether you're an empath or you're not. Our mind is very powerful. And so one of my questions I had to myself as I was writing this book is, well, what is an empathic person picking up? Because everything we pick up has an origin, and we need to discern, did we create it and we're just now becoming aware of it, or was it created from someone else? Did it originate outside of ourselves? And projections is something we all do. It's our mind, and a lazy mind will project more. But if you come into a room and there's a lot of projections, the energy will feel a little bit different. And this is kind of my invitation to sensitive people, is to take note of how does certain rooms feel, certain environments, because, a room that's, overburdened with a lot of projections, has its own way of creating toxicity. And environments are very important for everyone, so I would start there. Lead me back to your question again, just so I know.
As you're going through the course or the book, what have you found have been some of those who are on that journey of evolving into the better boundaried, the higher boundaried empath? What do you find are some really big ahas that people make?
self-love. I mean, self-love is the biggest tool that to set boundaries, because, and I'll give an example with the projections. I knew I was leading there somehow. So projections, I do this in workshops where um, we'll purposely project something onto a person. And I use dowsing rods, and I can show a person that their energy is impacted by projections. It takes a hit, and you get a lot, and we self project. So it's just not the external, it's, we have our own self projections, and that impacts our energy field and the health of our energy field. And so one of the things that creates a way that projections can impact us is examine for yourself anywhere you're self-conscious. If you're self-conscious, you are kind of putting like Velcro on your energy fields. And so anyone who would have a thought towards you around this issue, it will really kind of come in and hit you, as well as if anyone in your family or someone you are really connected through the heart, it will even do it doubly so. And so when you start self-love and compassion, you strengthen resiliency in your energy fields. And so this is why, we're all, sensitive to some degree. And I'm using this as a very broad, because this is true for anyone. The more you work on self-compassion, compassion, this is going to build your resilience and your boundaries. Because when you use I am statements, particularly, I am statements are kind of held at your core, and they resonate out. So if you look at people who use affirmations, it's usually I am this, and it can be very mental, and maybe not as effective, because you may say I am beautiful, I am, whatever you want to put in. But if you don't necessarily feel that way, there's going to be a disparity. And so I always advise people, what does the thing that you are affirming feel like? And step into that feeling, because the emotional body is like the fuel. And so the more that you can be working with I am statements and feeling it and embodying that truth, that also offers resilience and boundaries. But I also, for empathic people, the other boundary I say is the true boundary of an empath is asking, is this mine? Because, I talk about the energetic realm and the physical realm, and that can make it sound like they're separate, but, we're all energy. And it's important, the aha moment I think a lot of people have is I demonstrate for an empathic person, when they pick something up from the environment, your energy fields actually expand, very much like that sponge. It is our mascot, and we do our energy fields do expand, but it's also more like an expander zipper you see in suitcases that just give you a little bit more volume if you do the zipper out. Because what happens when we pick up something empathically, our energy system is holding that energy on the outside of our energy fields, waiting for us to acknowledge it. And the thing is, it's out on the outside of our field, but we can still feel it. We can feel a shift in moods. We can feel a sudden pain or a difference in temperature. And it feels very visceral. It feels very much here. And this is why I think, 20 years ago, everything was about protection, because we would feel it. And if we felt it, it must be ours, or we feel it and it must be right here on us. When now that we've expanded and we have more awareness of our energy bodies and our energy systems, it's actually outside of us. And it's waiting for us to discern what, oh, I picked something up. And usually what we're picking up is people's unprocessed emotions and thoughts that they do not, they were never intended for us. So the minute I started to understand that what I picked up was not intended for me, I became very compassionate towards what I was picking up, because I was, in a sense, being given privy to understanding that somebody was in a difficult place or couldn't accept something or was in denial, and they couldn't even name what it is that they were feeling. And so I say the true role of an empath is sensing balance in the energetic realm and also acting as a surrogate to name what we pick up, and not to engage, not to like process it. It's, you don't win by processing other people's feelings and emotions, but by simply naming something you pick up in the environment and offering up as a witness to whoever originated it or created it, you're offering them movement. And I'll share a story here, if I may. In the book, I am talking about empathic receptivity and the work that empaths do. And empaths are very suited to doing property clearing or space clearing, just because we already are in a larger conversation with the environment. And so when I lived in Texas, I was asked to clear a house, fairly large house down by Rice Village in a nice prestigious area. And it was a couple that had married and later in life, but the husband still had one daughter living at home. And she was in her senior year of high school, getting ready to go off to college. And I was to do the whole house. It wasn't specific to any one person or any one problem. It was just, they wanted kind of a fresh slate. And the house, was older and had, a little bit of stuff that I was picking up, but not anything major. But I came into the daughter's room, and the impression that I would have, and if you were to see me from the outside, it would look like I was sitting in a room and I was meditating, because what I'm doing is I'm tuning in intuitively to the room and to see what would come to me passively, what was there to pick up. And I really kept picking up strong messaging about feeling trapped like a prisoner. And so I sat with that and I named it. Why, I'm sensing that you feel very trapped. What is it about your life that you're feeling trapped? And so I'm having kind of a conversation with the energy in the room and the daughter, who it is her room. So energetically, it could be like, just almost like a prayer. I'm just, having a conversation with the room, with her. And, I offer it compassion and, and I lift it up as much as I can energetically. And so I left the house, I didn't share much with the people because you want its privacy, this daughter, if she wants to share this with her parents, then that is her right, not mine. And, but what happened was very interesting is I barely got myself home. I lived about 45 minutes away. And I got a message from them, the parents, that they were like, "What did you do? Oh my goodness, our daughter came to us and started to talk to about how she's struggling and she's felt really trapped in life. And we had no idea. We knew something was wrong, but we didn't know, and she's like a completely different person." And this is the beauty of being so connected to your nature, that witnessing can offer movement.
Wow. That is such a beautiful story. And I really appreciate you sharing that with us. I've, got goosebumps as you were sharing that. It is powerful to be witnessed. And
Yeah.
I have a morning group called Raw, and it's Reawakening Wisdom. And we have time to sit and journal. And then we have 30 minutes to share what came up for us in our journaling practice. And the number one rule is that we don't offer each other any advice.
Mm.
We are just simply a witness. If someone asks for advice, I request that first we ask each other questions and get really curious about where that's coming from, because I do believe that the wisdom's inside.
Mm.
But first. And I'm always so fascinated by so often when we're able to say out loud what is true, what's able to transform it with others witnessing that. And so that is a powerful place.
It is, and I'm going to just close this down because I'm like, okay, there. I think that's brilliant that you do that, because I have a small bit in the back of the book. My book's broken down into 5 parts, 5 fields, and the last one is the field of mystery. And so I talk a bit about different things, but one of the smaller bits is when helping is hurting. And you see this a lot in spiritual communities, especially somebody who's kind of suddenly awakening to the fact that they can pick up information, and then they want to share it. And I love that we're going to talk about this, because this is also about boundaries. And you were really asking me what guidance I can give on boundaries. But I also discovered in, communities, you'll read that people will want to talk about the narcissist and the empath as this dynamic that it naturally occurs. And it can be very negative. It can be very much focused outward about this person and their issues. And then but it also has a gift that if you are in such a relationship, it's bringing you everything you need to know about creating boundaries for yourself. Mm-hmm. But there's this other boundary, because empathic people are psychically in tune people. They can pick up, and then if you then share it with somebody, or share it with that person, and they hadn't asked for it, that's overstepping a boundary. It's very easy to think that boundaries are about, your worth and your this and that, and nobody can pass that threshold because you're so embodied. But you have to be honest with yourself, and where do you encroach boundaries of other people because of your sensitive nature? And there are times where you need to speak up. I'm not saying, don't silence yourself, but it requires spiritual maturity of knowing when are you to speak and tell somebody or inform someone. Because, I think you could start a whole forum on people who, received information they weren't quite ready for, or wasn't even correct. Perhaps it was coming from something lower vibration, so I think it's really great that you create boundaries within your group with these parameters, because that's a lot to sit with. If you get an intuitive hit about somebody, and if you're eager, you want to just tell them, why do you want to tell them? Is there a need to be needed? Is there a need for attention? I mean, we may be spiritually aligned and empathic, but we still have a lot of questions we can ask ourselves about our motivations and our intentions.
Absolutely. And it's wonderful to have a space where we practice that, right? I mean, none of us are 100% great about it. But I'd say we're all 90% really good at it. And every now and then one of us, including myself, will slip up, and then it'll be like, oh, wait, excuse me, I'm sorry, right? But the goal is that we just witness one another.
Yeah. And I think because you're also, writing a book and launching a book, you'll find that there's similar things within writing communities, that when you're asked to be a reader, the author should give questions to the reader, because they want to create constructive feedback. And if you just hand somebody your book and say, here, read it and let me know what you think, you could get a deluge of things that, you're not going to even attempt to do with your book. But so it means you have to take authority over what you've created. And yes, you want feedback. You want to make it the best book possible, but you need to hand questions to that reader. This is what I'm looking for. This is what would be helpful for me, and that way you really target what you already intuitively might feel needs a little bit of attention or work or another pair of eyes on.
I love that you just brought that up, the idea of creating authority around what we create.
Mm.
One of the questions we were grappling with within Raw this week, posed by one of the members, was who do we owe with our art? Just a question for us to ponder.
Mhm.
And I think that is ultimately about creating authority. And you've just connected a dot for me that it's what authority are we creating with what we're putting out into the world, what we're producing. And then who we owe maybe doesn't come into place.
Right, because O is kind of a debt consciousness, right? So apart from the fact that, like, when I wrote this book, I felt like I was doing it as service. I felt that it was an expression of service for me to share what I knew. But I also think that, art is so interesting because, art has an audience, and unless you're very specific and great at making sure only that audience sees it, it's open for interpretation to anyone. So, can you create your art and not be trying to control the message, allow people to have their relationship with it. I have a friend who he said something brilliant, and I bring it up in the book, but his definition of terrorism is somebody else telling you who you are. And I often think about this with art because you have a lot of art critics, you have a lot of people fans, but as an artist, to not feel like somebody is taking away your innate connection to being the creator and being told, well, your art means this, or this art does this. If somebody said, oh, your art made me feel this way, that's more the person taking personal responsibility versus projecting onto that artist, oh, your art, it's more of a projection. Did you feel what I'm
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
100%. Yeah. And yeah, I was really just touched by what your friend's definition of terrorism is someone else telling you who you are. Wow. That
Yeah,
is terrorism.
it is. And you see, in light of conformity and why people conform, because somebody has told them they're not allowed outside that box.
Right.
And so it goes deep. It's also why I didn't pick a fight with the dictionary, but early on in my book, I highlight that for me, part of the purpose of the book was to bring back ownership of the word empath. As I wrote the book, many times my online dictionary would tell me the word didn't exist or was not found, or if I were to find it, it would say originated in fantasy and science fiction. And then I began to understand how difficult it is for an empathic, sensitive person to language for themselves an identity around this, or to anyone else, because when a cultural authority such as a dictionary gives you a narrow glance and only really kind of puts you in that paranormal of science fiction and fantasy, that to me showed that things need to change. The dialogue needs to include, and I do point out that rocket ship, which is, we have rockets and rocket ships, but it was originally, the first time it was ever found in literature was in a science fiction book in the 1800s. And yet you can look up rocket ship and it does not say origin, science fiction or fantasy.
Wow.
So language is a very important part of my book because that's it's energy. Language is energy, and that's why I also caution like people who do think that who look upon themselves as an empath. If you're not quite there of understanding your empathic nature, you have to understand that the physical world is like a sandbox, and it's where we're creating. and we're recreating with words. And if you look up the word to create, it is defined as to call into being. We need language to call in and create. And so if you are saying that I am an empath and you're overwhelmed and you kind of curse it and you think it's like made you too vulnerable or too empathetic, you have to understand that by saying I'm an empath, the environment's taking you at your word. And I use that play on pun because it is taking you at your word. And so the energetic realm is responding to that. And it's, again, it's going to make you understand yourself more intimately. But it's also, for me, a cautionary, if you really are understanding your intuitive empathic receptivity, I wouldn't go straight for I am an empath. I would say I'm empathic, because it will give you more space around you to discover yourself and your true nature.
I love that. And along those lines, I want to ask you about the distinction between highly sensitive people, HSPs, and empaths. Can
This
you talk to us a little bit about that? This seems like a good place for this part.
Yes, it really is. So like in 1989, Dr. Elaine Aron, she was the first person who kind of labeled or gave the label HSP. And out of the research that she and her husband did, they identified that there was a genetic marker that maybe 15 to 20% of the world population carries. And it's a highly sensitive person. There's a whole list of traits that goes along with it. But the environment, whether it's bright lights, sounds, allergens, emotional vulnerability of feeling like very sensitive to criticism or rejection, very nuanced at seeing fine details. A lot of this is, so a lot of people who are sensitive were really excited that, okay, just because, like I said, the dictionary, it hasn't allowed us a lot of identifiers. So here is this label, highly sensitive person. And I do think empathic people, are highly sensitive persons as well, but I'm not doing genetic tests, so I can't really give you facts on that. But the thing is that over the last, so 30 years since 1989, this one label fits all isn't really working out so much, because now as we have more energetic awareness, we understand that intuition has its own sensitivities. And so the way I like to define or a distinction between HSP and an empathic person, if you're empathic, you have probably sometime in your life felt something and said, I wonder if is that my imagination? Did I imagine that? Because we enter into this kind of invisible sensory conversation with the environment that really puts us questioning and doubting ourselves if what we're feeling is accurate. Whereas somebody who's highly sensitive, they are responding to something immediately in their space, their physical space, their physical relationships. And so that's why I like to kind of start to say, you can be HSP, but you can also be empathic. And it's really important to understand the source of your sensitivities, because if you are HSP, there are definitely therapies and modalities that would help you with that. Just as if you were clairsentient and empathic, there are more intuitive guidance teachers, mentors that could help you understand that better. But what both share is that both are using your nervous system, right? Your nervous system, there isn't a nervous system for intuition, and there isn't a nervous system for your, physical reality. It's all one integrated nervous system. And that is why I love that today we've gone away from needing to protect ourselves into regulating your nervous system. And it's now about in-house, it's about regulating yourself, taking responsibility, understanding your story and your triggers. How can you, help yourself?
I love that so much. I mean, and I'm very excited about your book. And I shared with you, I haven't I haven't yet had the pleasure of finishing it. And I'm very excited about taking it into a deeper dive, because I definitely would say I identify as both a highly
Mm.
sensitive person and an empath. And it's only, I was born in 1982. And so in my family, I went to a very, like, I went to a private school, but I went to a poor private Catholic school. I don't know how to explain that, but they didn't know about these things. Like, I'm so excited for kids these days who
Mm.
do have those sensitivities, and they're given the toolbox
Mm.
earlier, you know?
Yeah.
And, I was not, and it's only been in my late 30s where I'm starting to understand, I gained the skills to hold the boundaries, to learn how to use my empathic leanings in such a way that are useful and beneficial and a good thing. But it's taken me a very long time to figure out how to do those things.
But but that's perfect, because I think this is the other thing that we need to understand is that, you know, you may be born sensitive, and there's like choices here that, it can be overwhelming, and it can be overwhelming because the environment doesn't understand that. And so, but at some point you can turn sensitivities into guidance. And that it would be the message of my book, is find the source of your sensitivities and let it guide you, because that is part of creating your perception. I do also want to point out that empathy, true empathy comes from knowing your life story. So each person's level of empathy is based on their life experiences. So, like for myself, I didn't really ever hear the word empath or empathic until my late 20s,
Mm,
right? So I think there is periods in time where a person's consciousness awakens, gets
mhm,
curious, wants to explore, wants to understand. And, but we need enough life experiences to help us get there, and one of the exercises I like to do for people is say, make a list from your life experiences of all the things that you could have empathy for.
mm,
And, the list can be long, and you could share, and you could see how one person might have a completely different element of empathy towards a faction of society based on their life experiences that you don't have. But, everybody can take empathy and upgrade it to compassion.
mm,
And, one of the things I say about an empathic person or a spiritually mature person is entering into the heart. And compassion is where, is in the heart chakra in the spiritual body, but it's also in the neutral channel. And I say this, and people think it's really weird to think that, why would you say compassion is neutral? And it's because if you are truly holding compassion, you are not judging, so you have to be in that flow. And if you are holding compassion for somebody else, you have to have it equal or more for yourself.
mm,
you know
yeah.
you need to be able to, another exercise I do is have people meditate on that one thing or a thing that they truly love unconditionally, with adoration. And then as they're sitting with that love and that essence of connection, give it a minute or two, swap that object out and put yourself there.
Mm.
Can you feel as much love and, to yourself? Yeah.
This conversation has been so rich, and I'm excited to finish your book. And I really think everybody needs to go out and purchase this book, The Space in Between, an Empath's Field Guide. It is incredible. And I know it's going to be a useful guide that really needs to be on everyone's nightstand, like immediately, especially everyone listening, because I know this audience, and they're exactly who you wrote this book for. And I'm wondering if there's anything else you'd like to share with us.
Well, I'd like to say because I love that you have a group and you share and you've got a community. If anyone feels this is a great book for a book club or for a spiritual development group, go through it together. Somebody joked it might take you 6 months, but um, it would be, I would really invite that. And if anyone were to do that, please reach out to me and I would be more than willing to come on a call with the group and at different times to answer questions or to listen and witness. That would be wonderful. I also think if people want to understand more sympathy, empathy, and compassion, I have a YouTube channel. It's my name and it's from my perspective. And I worked with an illustrator out of South Africa, and she helped do, so it's kind of cartoons. And I talk about the energy bodies and what is compassion.
We will for sure link to your YouTube channel and to the link to purchase the book in the show notes. So anybody who wants to check that out, visit the show notes. You'll be able to find those there. And then my last question for you is, how do you live a life of abundance?
Oh my goodness. Being with nature, nature is the most authentic thing in our presence. It knows itself. And, I live in places where there is wild and there's, plenty of nature. But, if you're in places where you don't have that, you can find it in all the details. And I'm very full right now. This has been a dream to get this book out, and now to see it, that has fulfilled me in so much. And having conversations with you and meeting people who resonate with my message and say, I had somebody say, you put words to the wordless. And that was about the highest compliment I could have received. And so I am filled with joy and abundance. So, and it's a state of mind. And you have to understand there's emotions, and then there's states of being. And a state of being like love or joy, it runs through your whole energy system, right? And so that's why we love those enlightened states, because it doesn't reduce us, it illuminates us.
Mm. Thank you so much for being on the show and for sharing all of that. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank you, Alisha.